Welcome to Wordpath, the show about Oklahoma Indian languages and the people who are teaching and preserving them. My guest tonight is Linda Poolaw, who is a member of the Executive Committee of the Delaware Nation of Oklahoma. She's also Grand Chief of the Delaware Grand Council of North America. Welcome, Linda, and thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Can you start us off by teaching us how you would greet someone in Delaware?
Okay, thank you for asking me to be here, number one. And number two, if I would approach you, I'd say Keko Hedge, and which is sort of hard to explain in English, but it's like, how are you? How are you feeling? Is everything good with you, well with you? And if it is, and then you'd answer Shiki Hedge, and that means good. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now, can you tell us a little bit about your tribe? This is a tribe out in, you'll tell the details, but in the Anadarko area. I always used to think of the Western Delaware tribe and the Eastern Delaware. The official name now is Delaware Nation of Oklahoma, right? Tell us a little bit about who you are and where you are and your language situation.
Well, I don't think we have that much time for me to tell you who we are, because of course all tribes think, even in their language, their name is the real man, the only man, or whatever. And going back in our history would have to go back to, our name, where we got our name, and it's Lenape, and which means red man or real man, or the only man. A lot of people like to say Lenape, which is man. Sort of kind of cleared that up a little bit, but I call myself Lenape. And Lord Delaware is the one that named us after him when we first became contacted with him on the East Coast, which is now New Jersey. And so Delaware eventually turned into Delaware. But there are actually 4 groups of us. There are 2 in Canada and 1 in eastern Oklahoma near Bartlesville in the community of Dewey. And they're the Delawares of Oklahoma. We, the Delawares in western Oklahoma, the Delaware Nation, separated from the main group, what they call the main group, in early 1800s, late 1700s, early 1800s, at Cape Girardeau, Missouri. And my ancestors that I'm descended from, we went down into what is now Missouri and what is now the Brazos Valley in Texas. And in the early 1800s, then we start making our way up toward Caddo County in southwestern Oklahoma. We were trying to go on into, in fact, we had a Mexican land grant that was given to some of our scouts, and we were trying to go into Mexico. I believe, in the stories I hear, is trying to find the salt water once more. And because we were used to the fish and used to those kinds of foods. But there's another long story of why we didn't. But yeah, there's about 1,200 of us now in Caddo County.
Well, now what about, before we go on, let's take a moment to give credit to the maker of these fine artifacts that we saw on the table at the beginning of the show. Who made these and what are they?
These are made by a very good friend of mine, a young Delaware man by the name of Michael Watkins. And he has come into his own within the past 10 years, and I buy whatever I can, whatever he's got. I try to collect as much of his work, and I have to say now he's getting out of my price range. So, but what he does, he gets pictures or gets a vision or whatever of a Delaware artifact, and he copies those into pecan or cedar or any kind of wood. So, yeah, he's becoming very, very famous, and he's so good. He is so good.
Beautiful.
His name's Michael Watkins, and he lives in Anadarko.
Good. I'd like for people to know that, because these are beautiful pieces. Now, when we talked on the phone before, you and I had never met face to face, and my knowledge of Delaware, as I told you, was sort of limited. I was aware of the 2 tribes within Oklahoma, and very small number of speakers left. Now, you immediately told me, well, I'm approximately quoting you here, you said, well, our language is dead, but I can come and talk to you about it. Now, fill us in a little bit on tell us the facts there.
Okay, well, right after I got out of college at Chickasha in 1974, I began working for the tribe, the Delaware tribe there in Anadarko, and we had just received a grant from the National Endowment and on preserving our language. And my degree was not in preserving a Delaware language, so I didn't have a clue on how to do that. But I got a tape recorder, and whatever, and I got my 8 speakers that we had left at that time, sat around the table and did the best I could do, was just turn on the tape recorder, and we had a subject for that week, and just let them talk. And of course, I tried to follow what I learned in my first grade, you know, counting and colors and animals' names and whatever. After a while, we did this for over a year, and after a while, my people got so skilled at what they were doing. At first, they were afraid of the tape recorder, and then I'd forget to turn it on sometimes, and they'd say, "Turn it on, so we can talk." I mean, it was it was pretty sad. I mean, it was, you know.
Well, but the tapes must be very precious to you
and
now.
I knew that, you know, and they're all dead now. They're all gone. And the last one was Bessie Snake, and she died last year in January. And she was our last fluent speaker. But by 1975, we had 8 left, and that could speak fluent. We finished those, and the Oklahoma Indian Affairs Commission gave us a small grant, and we continued with that and made a little coloring book and that kind of thing. But so those 2 things helped us preserve what we have now, or we wouldn't have anything. We have over 100 hours in tapes.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm really glad you did that.
Yeah, so we can go back to those tapes now and take from whatever. Of course, there's lots of things that probably did wrong, but at least we have, and we preserved that language, our language at that time. And in that small community of around 1,000 people, we discovered, I had Dr. Ives Goddard come to visit us, and to me, he's the foremost in any language, but the Delaware Lenape language. He's at Smithsonian in New York, in Washington. Right. And that's when he told me at that time. I had invited the Delawares in Bartlesville in eastern Oklahoma, and they came down, and we had 2 days of just sitting around the table and talking, in which we had never done before. We knew where each of us were, but we had never did this on a language learning kind of thing, and they had several speakers, and they still have 1 or 2 speakers left. But at that time, we all came together in the mid-'70s, and we had a good time, and we had meals, and they talked to each other, and it was wonderful hearing these conversations go back and forth. And now, of course, we can't do that. And I understand that the D. Ketchum, the Honorable Chief Ketchum up in Bartlesville, they're trying to do some things in reviving their language with the help of a good friend, Jim Rementer. We have just started. We have just we've just finished building the first Indian Tribal Community College, the Delawares in Anadarko, my people. And we're going to do a lot of things with that. Hopefully, I'm going to squeeze in some space so we can learn, you know, from some of the tapes, the languages and things like that.
That's great.
I don't know, it may be 2 o'clock in the morning, but we'll get it done.
Right. Well, that's just great. Now, you made an interesting point to me a little while ago when we were talking about this, and you were talking about having met Ives Goddard, and that you said this was in the 70s, right? And he told you at that time, he said, you know, your language is dead. You didn't want to hear him say that, but you say that now you realize that that was already true then. We
were sitting in a restaurant in Anadarko, Oklahoma, when he told me that. I got real upset. And like it was just like somebody had taken a child from me or something, you know. And but he explained himself, and explained that even if you do have 8 speakers left, if that language is not spoken in the home, well then, or every day, and on an everyday basis, the language is dead. It's not dying, it's dead. And it's almost next to impossible to bring that back. That was unbelievable. Now, in the year 2000, I believe him.
Yeah. Well, this is, you know, these are unpleasant things to say, but there's so many tribes in Oklahoma now that are not in the situation that your tribe is, and that need to be looking ahead to this cold, hard reality. And you know, making sure they're not in denial, they're not postponing what needs to be done now. So I think it's good, it's really good for people to have a chance to hear you say this. What about before the 70s, before you got involved? Were there language programs before?
No. I mean, it was just one of those things that it wasn't going to go away. We always had.
Right.
And you know, you hear a lot of people talking, a lot of, well, you know, we got, you know, whipped in Indian school if we spoke our language, and I've heard that over and over and over again. And it was true. My mother went to Indian school, and I know that. But that was probably a lot of the reason. The biggest reason is that, you know, today, and you have to create an interest, enthusiasm, whatever. And I hear every day, and you know, it sort of upsets me when I hear people talk, well, why don't you teach Delaware? You know, well, first you have to have somebody to help you, and we do still have a couple of women that we do use, but that was raised in you know, the Delaware speaking homes, but we don't have the enthusiasm, and I think that goes. You think you're enthused. We started some classes, and then people start dropping out, and everybody would come. There'd be a whole bunch in the beginning, but learning a language like everybody knows is very difficult.
Right.
And you know, you run home and you turn on the television, or you have grandma and grandpa back in that bedroom or in a nursing home, the ones that you can converse with and can teach you those kinds of things. So there's, you know, it's next to impossible. You really have to be dedicated. I was down the early part of this week. I was down with Chief Greg Pyle and Bill Anatubby down in Durant at a meeting, and it was really, really good to hear them say, and especially the Honorable Chief Pyle say that they've got all these these Choctaw learning centers that's going on now, and has been going on. And while we were there, we went and staying at the same hotel. They had a kind of like a convention, and everybody had came in to talk about their language, and that makes me feel good.
Right.
You know, that at least someone will know that, because there's so much in a language. There's so much in a language. Like I was telling you earlier, you know, there's things that I'd sit there for a year, you know, and listen to the people, and after a while I start catching on a little bit. But then when they tell a story, they wanted me to know this story also. So then they would say it to me in English afterward. And when I listened to, even in Indian and not knowing, in Lenape and not knowing what they were talking about, I just, the emotions that was going on in that language, the sadness or the laughter, mostly the laughter, they would just be really laughing. And then when they tell the story to me, I'm going,
Kind of flat, right?
I don't know what was so funny about that. But anyway, you know,
That's that old
yeah,
expression, right?
but I laughed
something
anyway.
in the translation.
Yeah, that old expression, you lose something in translation. Right. So, and I know when my mother used to say, when my mother when her mother would bawl her out or correct her or admonish her, it just break her heart if she said it in Indian. She said, there's never a bawling out like as bad as you get in Indian. It's when, you know, you can bawl you out in English, and you know, but don't get bawled out in Indian, I understand.
Well, I think when people are speaking their native language, it really comes from the heart. And something like you talk about the stories and the funny things in the stories, something like humor, sometimes it depends on the actual sound of a certain word or another word in the previous sentence or something, and you just can't translate all of that.
That's right. That's right.
There's no way.
And you want, and I guess you'd want to. Even like we were talking about, even in my Indian world that I'm in, and of course I love humor, and we, you know, I work at at an Indian clinic, and I'm around Native people, all kinds of Native people all day long, and the humor that goes on there, and I don't know, you know, I think it's just Indian humor is just something that we use to make it not so bad. I know one time my mother, I had read this in a book that a reporter or somebody had asked my mom, you know, the Delawares came all the way from the East Coast, you know, were driven and brought and end up in Caddo County. How did you make it? That was a long way, you know, and you're still here. You know, you're still here. They still haven't got rid of you yet. And in that book, I heard her. She wrote. She said, because we could laugh. That's why we made it. And I always wondered about that. And as I'm, you know, I'm past 50, way past 50, looking close at 60 now. Now I'm beginning to understand what that, what that means. It's that humor, that language, that identity, and of course that's what makes a tribe, is their language. If I spoke Wichita, then, I'd be Wichita. I wouldn't be Delaware. So that people kind of miss that sometimes because that language what makes the tribe a tribe.
I hear a lot of people say that in different tribes. A lot of people have said that on this show, but now that brings us to a hard question I have to ask you. You're saying your language is gone. What makes you a tribe is your language. What does it mean today to be Delaware? How do people know that they're Delaware? How is that different from being something else? Has this had a big impact on people's identity within your own tribe?
I don't know yet. We don't know yet. Right now we're in the business of surviving. We're in the business of keeping up with the rest of the people.
Right.
So I don't know exactly what that means of losing a language. A lot of our tribes are going to have to come to that realization. I think a lot of it has kind of happened anyway, as far as dancing, contest, Indian dancing. It's sort of a pan-Indian dancing now, and I don't know where that's going. My grandfather, I heard he said a long time ago, my Kiowa, I'm half Delaware and half Kiowa, and my Kiowa grandfather said, I don't know, we're going too fast. I don't know where we're going. So I don't know. You hang tenaciously toward something, and I'm all these tribes, and I just don't know where these children, like at Riverside Indian School, it's hard to teach. I'm on school board there. It's hard to teach a native language because you got 30 and 40 kids there. What language are you going to teach? So at an Indian school where there's a Choctaw Indian school, it'd be simple.
Right.
It's a hard question. I can't answer you, and I think that the native people is going to have to create their own identity, and because the language is gone.
Well, we did do one other show on a tribe that describes themselves as having lost their language in Oklahoma, which is the Modocs. And the show was mostly, they didn't want to talk about, oh no, we've lost our language, who are we? The show was about how they still know who they are and the different cultural traditions that they are carrying on and fostering among the young people, and that they're sort of sad that they lost their language, but they're still working on being Modoc. So we know people I'm not even Indian, and I was raised with English and I speak English now. So I thought that I had been taught by Indian friends that language and culture are inseparable and language and identity are inseparable. But it's obviously not quite that simple, because there are tribes that have lost their language and still they know who they are. I think it's bound to have had an impact, and it certainly would have an impact on, say, songs with real language in them, and things that if it's one thing to sing a song like that and know what you're singing, it's another thing just to sing it as memorized sounds. There's got to be a change, and yet obviously there's more to cultural identity than just language. I mean, your background, your educational background is in communications, and you were telling me about at the clinic, observing how people communicate and their body language, and not even spoken language, but body language and posture and facial expression, and you can read a lot in that because you're very sensitive to that. And some of that, of course, is tribe specific, or at least it's different among Indian people than non-Indian people. There are all kinds of things that go with identity that aren't strictly language.
That's right. And I think people like Mike Watkins, who's bringing this
these are uniquely Delaware objects.
And there are lots of other things other than politics, other than Indian politics, in Indian gaming. There's lots of things that we're going to go into. This new century is going to really be interesting, and it's a challenge, I think, for each and every tribe to sit back just for a day and maybe think about where are we going. Are we doing enough, enough to keep our identity together? Is it going to be books? Is it going to be, artifacts? What is it? And it has to be history, and it has to be stories, and it has to instill that pride,
And there's, while I was being taught by so many people that you can't have your culture without your language, the sort of the flip side of that is there's a movement now in Oklahoma, the second or third time this has come around, to try to have Oklahoma be an English-only kind of place. It makes my flesh crawl to hear about this whole thing. But you know what a lot of people supporting that say is, if we all spoke the language, we'd all the same language, and all focus on learning to speak English to each other, it would make us all one. It would be a great unifier. We'd all be one culture. And it makes me think, well, what do you think we all are now? Are those of us who don't speak English as well as others, are we not Americans too, you know?
Right, right.
So part of me says, yes, language is culture and identity. Another part says, oh, no, it's not. You don't have to speak English to be an American, you know, or you don't have to put that language first. So I'm, personally, you know, I'm sort of torn about this. I think it's obviously a more complex issue than either side has sort of presented it as, but Lord knows language is important to Indian people, and those tribes that do still have their language, they need to just realize how precious it is and how little time it takes it to go.
Yeah. Just seemed like a blink of an eye, your language is gone. Right. And when I hear it on tapes, you know, whew, talk about emotion. Yeah. You know, I still can't listen to my mother speak. I won't. But when I listen to the language when other people are speaking, I get really lonesome, and you know. So, and it's a beautiful language. And in Delaware, I understand for Dr. Ives Goddard, he was researching at one time really old Delaware. And he walked up to my mom one time when he came to Oklahoma and to Anadarko, and she'd never met him. And she was drying corn at the back of her home. And he walked up behind her, and he spoke to her in old Delaware, saying, "You sure that corn is ready?" And she said it sounded like her great-grandmother or grandmother talking to her. She thought she'd died, and you know, she scared her to death. But even, you know, speakers are
ancient languages. They have ability to sort of. It's like they're reaching back in history, bringing it right up to today, and it's chilling. It's just so powerful. Let me. We're running a little short on time, so I wanted to make sure we got a chance to show these materials that you brought with you. Can we get a shot of this book? Tell us a little bit about what I'm holding up here.
Okay, and we completed that in 1997 with a National Endowment grant. I didn't have too much to do with it, I'm sorry to say, but some of those tapes on there are taken from the tapes of so
a set of tapes and also some written materials.
And it's a book, and it tells you how to speak Delaware.
Great. Is this still available?
Yeah.
Can people get this? Who would they contact?
Okay, they would call the Delaware Tribe, the Delaware Tribal Nation in Anadarko, 405-247-2448. And we're on the web, so.
Great.
So you can find it. And that is.
How about this other book?
Okay, Dr. Dwayne Hale, who was around the university for a while. Now he's in Texas. He's the one that wrote our history, and that's after we left Missouri and came up through Texas and into Caddo County.
So this is basically a history book. This other book that you wrote. Oops, sorry. Can we see that? Okay.
And you can get that from the same place too. Although we just have very few copies of those left, and so we may be redoing in paperback soon.
Great. Well, that's wonderful. It's wonderful for tribes to be writing their own history.
Yeah, really great.
And about time. I don't want to belabor the obvious, but I sort of do. My last point I have here in my notes is what advice, we've mentioned this some already, but I'll give you a chance just to say this again. What advice would you give to people in other tribes in Oklahoma who still have their language?
Is to keep up with the good work, for example, the Choctaws. But if you get the little kids
right.
are really easy to learn.
Right.
Start them off. Don't let them, go by the wayside. Talk to them. They're not going to forget. They're not going to ever forget. But start with the younger people, and then let the younger people teach the older people.
Right. I think that's the way to do it too. Get the elders with the little kids. Yeah. The kids can teach the ones in between, right? And they're such an inspiration too. I've seen people just looking like, oh my gosh, when they see what a little kid can do, they say, well, maybe I could do that too.
They have kind of like a tabula rasa up there.
It is, yes, it is easier for the children, but they can be an inspiration to the adults to work a little bit harder at it too. And the children are the key to the future, no doubt about it. Well, thank you so much for helping us to appreciate what really every tribe in Oklahoma, every tribe in this country really is facing to one degree or another, I think, or very few exceptions. It's important to consider these things very soberly and enjoy the languages while they're here. Keep make as many records of them as you can. I'm so glad that you made those tapes that you did, and that people have saved what they have saved. And as you said, emphasize getting the children to learn. If you want your language to have a future, it's got to start with the children.
The secret is the children. Yep.
It absolutely is. Thank you so very much for coming here tonight.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. See you next time on Wordpath.
Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene madaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene madaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene madaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene madaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene.